Welcome, listeners. Here's your gateway to the darkest corners of the human psyche. Immerse yourself in bone-chilling tales of terror, each story meticulously narrated to send shivers down your spine. From haunted houses to sinister creatures lurking in the shadows, every episode promises to leave you on the edge of your seat. Join us, if you dare, and let your darkest fears come to life. Subscribe now and become a part of the nightmare. Do not enter. When I first moved into my apartment, the landlord told me a strange thing. Always check that the room is the right one before entering. Sage advice from a master of the obvious, you might say. Truth be told, I hadn't really been paying much attention up to that point. My landlord was the type of woman that put no effort in sounding happy to meet to you. And whatever Eastern European accent, she had certainly didn't make it any easier to understand. I probably should have asked a few more questions. But signing a lease wasn't a process I wanted to prolong any longer than I had to. Besides, it's not like I really needed an explanation. My early childhood diet didn't consist exclusively of paint chips after all. For how cheap the rent was, I wasn't about to worry over a bad joke. The place was one of those oddities of design that seemed to suck the fun out of everything anyway. Nothing but a series of copy and paste apartments stacked on top of each other for 13 laborious floors. Each one was practically identical, right down to the way the front door stuck when it rained. Not a single window among them. They even came furnished with a full set of drab appliances and furniture, devoid of any particular style or taste. It's like living in a filing cabinet, sterile and lacking a life of its own. You'd think we all lived in alphabetical order and referred to each other by apartment numbers. My accountant would love this place. As dull as the accommodations were, it didn't take more than a month for things to get interesting. They were little things at first, mostly just noises. Nothing particularly sinister, but they did a great job of keeping me up at night. One night I'd hear unintelligible whispers coming from my neighbor's bathroom that lasted for hours. The next I'd swear I heard far-off wolf-like howls from the floor above despite a rigidly enforced no pets policy. Once I even caught the unmistakable sound of crashing waves on sandy beach from an apartment on the 6th floor. Occasionally, I would hear the noises coming from rooms in my own apartment. However, nothing would be out of place when I checked. I may have forgotten to mention that I live alone. It took a bit longer for anything really strange to happen, though. It was 4 months into my stay when the sound of clinking glass and slamming cabinets woke me. It came from the kitchen, and I knew it had to be an intruder. I quietly slipped out of bed and grabbed the aluminum baseball bat I keep next to the door to remind me how I really should get more exercise. I must have looked absolutely ridiculous tiptoeing down my carpeted hallway to the kitchen with how much noise the intruder was making. When I reached the doorway to my kitchen, I chanced a peek inside. Sure enough, I saw a dark figure furiously rooting through my kitchen cabinets. Tightening my grip on the baseball bat, I flipped on the light switch. Lucky thing I did, too. Otherwise, I might have beaten an innocent old woman to death. My midnight intruder started at the sight of me, her wrinkled face twisting into a mixture of fright and confusion. The unassuming dirty dressing gown and fluffy pink slippers she wore seemed an odd choice for a burglar. I recognized the woman. She was the old lady who lived 2 doors down from me. I'd even helped her with her groceries that very evening. After managing to calm the poor woman down and assuring her that she was not in fact in her own flat, my elderly neighbor apologized profusely. She'd woken up in the middle of the night craving a cup, she explained, and must have gotten lost in the dark, unlit building. How she managed to slip into my apartment without either of us noticing was beyond me. She must suffer from dementia because she was absolutely convinced that she should still be in her own. I don't think she understood just how close she came to a baseball bat to the head, and I wasn't in the mood to explain it to her. I tried to be as polite and understanding as I could as I escorted her back to her apartment. But something was bothering me. Something about the whole affair made the little hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't until I locked my front door behind me that I realized what it was. Before going to bed, I remember quite clearly locking the door from the inside. I racked my brain all night, but I just couldn't explain how the old woman could have wandered into my apartment without opening my front door, having no one else to ask. I decided to bring the subject up to my next door neighbor the next day, cornering him in the hallway that evening. I had trouble broaching the subject. When I'd finally stammered out my story, however, he seemed rather unsurprised by the whole ordeal. Apparently, this sort of thing happened all the time. Not just to the old lady down the hall either. Almost everyone in the building had a similar tale. It was the doors, he said. They didn't always lead to the same place. Sometimes you would be facing a door that led to your bathroom, only for it to lead to your bedroom instead. It could even lead to a completely different apartment on a completely different floor. Once, he heard that someone's closet door had once opened to the alley on the north side of the building. It was a pretty crazy thing to think your door could lead anywhere in the building without notice. But my neighbor seemed to believe that the phenomenon stretched farther than that. To get around this little nuisance, he suggested I do what the other tenants do. The generally accepted method was to make 2 marks on either side of each doorway in the apartment with a marker. That way you could tell if the room you were about to enter was the right one at a glance. If the 2 marks didn't match up, you were staring at a doorway to the unknown. At least, that was the idea. The old lady must have forgotten to check when she stepped into my kitchen, or at least not seen it in the dark. My neighbor seemed rather annoyed by the thought. He made it painfully clear that I wait for the door to go back to normal before using it. I should, under no circumstances, ever enter a room that shouldn't be there. Always check first. My neighbor experienced the anomaly himself in the past, but only as a mild annoyance. Even still, he was very adamant that I take the matter seriously. But how could I? Who in their right mind would believe a story as insane as this? Sure, it could explain how the old lady down the hall got into my apartment without using the front door, but it created all sorts of other questions. And the last thing I wanted to question were the laws of physics. Mass hysteria, it had to be. A building filled to bursting with lunatics. In the end, I found it simpler to write my neighbor off as a head case and move on with my life. However, I did as he suggested. With a red Sharpie secretly borrowed from work, I drew a line on each side of every door jamb in my apartment. It was more out of curiosity than anything else. Or maybe I was just daring the universe to prove me wrong. Either way, after a few weeks, I'd gotten into the habit of checking if both marks were there before I entered a room. I saw it as a little inside joke. When in Rome, do as the wackos do. Eventually, it became a silly little ritual I would do to remind myself the world wasn't crazy. Just the guy next door. I'd been living in my apartment for a little over a year before it happened to me again. I'd gotten up in the middle of the night to grumpily use the bathroom like I'd done many times before. I was on autopilot. On my way back to bed, I lifted my tired eyes to the doorway leading to the bedroom and grinned at the now familiar red. But I hesitated. There was only one mark. Though only lit by a small lamp in the hallway, I was absolutely sure there was no red mark on the bedroom side of my door. I stood there for a while, blinking sleep from my eyes and trying to stare the second mark back into existence. The bedroom looked the same as I'd left it minutes before, save for the missing mark on the doorway. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? Maybe I was dreaming. Or was my kooky neighbor's story the real deal? As ridiculous as it sounded, I was sure of one thing. There had been 2 marks on my trip to the bathroom. I didn't go in right away. I wanted to, but a small part of me took what my neighbor told me seriously. First, I waved an empty hand in the doorway. Nothing particularly spooky happened. Emboldened by the knowledge that this phantom room wouldn't immediately melt my skin off, I took a tentative step inside. At first glance, nothing looked out of the ordinary. Everything was where I remember leaving it. Even my comforter was thrown aside like I'd just been sleeping under it minutes before. But then why was the mark missing from my doorframe? I was certain there had to be something different about this room. In that moment, my neighbor didn't seem so crazy, and all I needed to prove it was to find what was wrong with this room. I tore open my closet and flipped my mattress in search of clues. Every drawer was emptied on the floor in my quest. I even tore the carpets up at the ends to look underneath. I looked everywhere in my madness, but found nothing. Everything was where it should be. Somehow, though, I knew this was not my bedroom, and it wasn't until I turned back to the door to check if the second mark was really missing that I realized what was different about it. This room had no doors. Out of the dark, my first experience with the supernatural was one of the most terrible life experiences I can remember. It happened when I was young and dumb and wanted to go out into the world and explore. While I was out of my home country of Canada, I witnessed a horror I soon hoped to forget. I had gone on a trip with some of my buddies to Montana just below my home province of Alberta. We were originally going to stay in Yellowstone National Park, but decided to head to Glacier National Park first before camping out at Yellowstone for a few days. We finally reached Glacier Park after a 6-hour drive and had just enough time to do a little hiking before going to our hotel in the nearby town to rest and move on towards Yellowstone. We had gotten to the park around 4:30 p.m. and decided it was a great idea to hike after dark, so we hiked up the trail, looking at the glorious views of rivers and waterfalls of the Avalanche Creek Trail. The light began to fade rather quickly while we were about 2/3 of the way up, and we had hiked into the trail about 10 kilometers, so it would take us about 2 hours to walk back down from that point. This is when shit goes downhill. Myself and my friends were all outdoors men and loved to go hiking and travel around the Rocky Mountains, but we were still inexperienced when it came to night hiking. Since the trail we were on wasn't as traveled at this part of the hike, the trail was hard to follow in the dark, although every now and then we would see a sign that notified us that we were going in the right direction. At some point, maybe 1/3 of the way down the mountain, we ended up going off the trail, following a little rabbit trail, thinking we were still on the correct path. We began to figure out that we were definitely not going the right way as my friend checked his compass, showing we were heading deeper into the Rocky Mountains, miles and miles of forest. Then begins the mass panic, my friends, and I immediately turned around and began walking the way we came. But the trail we were following didn't look the same as it had before, leading us to being even more lost than before. That is when we collectively noticed how quiet it had gotten. No insects, no birds, nothing. It was dead silence. I knew this was a bad sign as I'm a hunter, and when it gets quiet like this, it means that there is a large predator around, and that it is hunting. We had literally become prey to some unknown beast in the woods. We all began getting a sudden spike of anxiety when I let the guys know what was up. That's when we heard a noise that brought terror, a guttural howl from up the mountain. It was then followed by many more. My heart went into my throat, and the terror I felt made me shake. Most of my friends did the same, all but 2 the others had already dipped and had began running in the direction opposite the howls. We all followed soon after, running ourselves ragged until we looked behind and saw the eye shine of something that was much larger than we had anticipated. The eyes were at least 6 feet off the ground and moving towards us fast. That is when we split up, running in random directions, hoping to lose these beasts. It was never going to happen. I could hear the breathe of one of these things about 20 feet behind me and gaining. All of a sudden, my friend appears from the trees to my right, and we end up running together until I cut off from him, hoping to escape. I know I left him to die that night, but it was a last-ditch effort that worked out to my advantage. I heard his screams from my left, and ran as fast as I could away from them, with tears rolling down my face as I hear his screams for help and him shrieking in pain. Then nothing, as if he never existed. I continue running down the mountain until I see a familiar sight ahead of me. It was one of the trail signs showing how far you were on the trail. I stopped, checked where I was, and started running again, hoping to get away from the creatures on the mountain. Another kilometer down the trail, I began hearing howls getting closer and closer by the moment, causing me to run even harder. Looking ahead, I see the sign saying parking lot and zoom past it in my panic, looking for the keys in my pocket and scrambling towards the only vehicle still left in the parking lot, which was my car. I use my fob to unlock my car from a distance and run as hard as I can towards it, slamming into the side of my door and opening it, hopping in and starting the car. I look out of my window towards the trail entrance and see two pairs of eyes staring at me from just out of the range of the lamppost. They stare at me before disappearing back into the brush as I drive away, never looking back. I arrived at the ranger station by the park entrance and ran inside looking disheveled and terrified. I began telling the ranger at the desk what had just happened. He then looked at me with a sad face, as if he knew something like this would happen, and called up the search and rescue team to come in the morning to look for them. They were never found. Something in the woods. I guess I'll start with a background. I'm a 33-year-old female, but this story takes place when I was a teenager, living in a suburb of Chicago. The village I lived in was quiet and middle class. We lived like a mile from the police station, and the worst crimes we had was a murder or two and robbery once in a blue moon. 99% of the time, boring and more boring. Unless you had a car, you were stuck just walking around the park at night with your friends. Kind of boring. Anyway, one night, my girlfriend and I decided to go hang out at a park with some guys at like 12 a.m. The night was a bit windy and had a full moon. I even got a kiss that night from the boy I liked. But the night wasn't just fun and hanging out late. There's a deep forest in the park with a stream with a playground right next to it. The same playground we went to with swings and jungle gym columns. There's two bridges, one of wood, the one everyone uses, and one bridge made of rocks that's rarely used because it is deeper in the forest over the stream, connecting the two halves of the forest park area. I'll get to the rock bridge in a minute. We hung around on the swings and chatted and just spent the evening together. I'm sitting and just looking around, talking and enjoying the peace and quiet in the moonlight. I have a full view of the forest and the dip of earth that I know leads to the stream. I see something moving over that dip of earth. Some dark shape. It looked like it was crawling out of the forest. An arm, then another arm. It pulls itself out of the ditch stream. A figure darker than the surrounding forest. And I'm sitting there, frozen. I think I'm seeing things. It just kind of lays there, on the ground, but doesn't move. A flash of fear grips me. What if it comes this way? I look to my friends, and no one notices anything. I look back, and it's gone. Did it go back or go somewhere? I really want to get out of there. Then one friend asks, "Did you guys hear about the urban legend of the rock bridge over the stream? Apparently, some kids or something played on the bridge and fell over and died." What a thing to say after what I saw. But I didn't ask anyone anything and just pretended I didn't see anything. But the experience stuck with me. I never talked about it because it must have been my imagination. Things like that happen only in scary movies, right? But I rarely went to that park after that. And Black Thing, if you are real, I hope we never meet again. Who knows what would have happened if you saw me the same time I saw you? True night watchman experience. I will admit first off that I have heard a lot of these deep web, dark web stories and have always called bullshit. However, a close friend of mine swore that she had been to this place and that she had seen some really messed up things. Some she would talk about, others she refused. She said some of the things she had seen would haunt her for the rest of her life. I should have just let it go at that, but I wanted to believe that she was making it all up and that there was no such place. But I was the one that was wrong. You know the drill by now. I downloaded Tor, Onion, and found a hidden wiki. I had been warned about some of the links and how they can trick you into some really crazy and horrible things. I clicked a few. They were mostly sex meetups, escort requests, drug deals. Needless to say, I was really starting to think I was right, and that the deep web was just an easy way to make shady deals that couldn't be traced. It was lame, tame, and a little bit boring. I looked around for something remotely interesting until I found the link, The Night Watchman. Okay, this could be interesting. I was thinking it might be some guy telling creepy stories or walking around a sleepy town at night or something. What greeted me was a flat black page with 3 videos blown up to cover the space, sitting side by side in a line. They were paused, and on each of them was a picture of different people. The first one had a family of 4, mom, dad, and 2 little girls. The second was a couple with the female being very obviously pregnant. The third was just one woman and her dog, a cute black lab with a white streak over his left eye. Before I could study them for too long, a voice came through. It was male, but slightly distorted, so I couldn't really hear what he actually sounded like. Here is what he said. Good evening. Tonight the Night Watchmen have brought you 3 unique households. Each of them lives different lives, believe different things, have different future plans. He stopped here and cleared his throat. For this next part, it sounded like he was smiling. Watch each video and then choose one. I really didn't understand the point of this task, but honestly, my interest was piqued. I was curious about where this was going. I clicked the first video. There wasn't much to it. It showed the family in their home, skipping through moments of them watching TV, playing in the backyard, having supper, the parents putting the kids to bed, starting to make love. It cut off there, thank God. I was starting to feel like a weird creep. I was seeing a part of people's lives that were meant for only them. I reluctantly clicked the next video. I was transported into the home of a young couple getting ready to start a family. It skipped through to them in the baby's room hugging and generally looking excited. They ate salads at the kitchen table, went through mail, looked through baby books and magazines, watched a show on TV, and then went to bed, snuggling up together. This one was so sweet I couldn't help but smile at what I had seen. However, I was still a voyeur in their personal moments. I had gone through the others. I figured it was only right to watch the last one. This one was of a single woman living with just her dog. She was a bit of a slob. She had dishes piled up, laundry on a love seat in the living room, and trash that was overflowing. The other 2 had been pretty tidy, the family having some toys and laundry lying around, the couple with a very clean house. I wondered if there was a point to that, since it did show these aspects in the videos. Anyway, the woman seemed lonely. She watched a lot of TV, ate a half-gallon of ice cream, checked her cell phone every few moments, obviously hoping for a call or text, played fetch with her dog, fed him, and then went to bed, taking her phone with her. She began to masturbate, and I began to feel incredibly awkward. Thankfully, this one ended there as well. I waited to see what was next. The videos reset and went back to the stills of each one again. The voice came back over and said, "Now that you have seen, which will you choose?" I sat there and watched, praying that someone else was here watching this too and would choose, but nothing happened for a few minutes. The videos disappeared and another 3 videos began playing simultaneously. These turned my stomach. There were 3 tall men. I assumed they were men by what character I could catch. They each wore the same clothing: black shirt, pants, boots, and a long black trench coat that dangled around their ankles. To top it all, they each wore a large, wide-brimmed black hat. "Have you decided? Which one will you choose?" The voice chimed in over the obviously live feed. "Death comes on swift wings for our ill-fated friends. We must choose one. That is how the game goes." He thought this was a game? I was horrified. Was I really supposed to choose who died here and who survived? It was ridiculous, and I went to close the page down. Calmly, the voice began again. "Before you close us down, you should know that if you do not choose one of the 3 shown here, your family will be next." I was startled by his declaration, but figured that he was just trying to scare me. He was doing a really good job, truthfully. "Anna," he said. My heart skipped a beat. He said my name. Now I was officially terrified. I just wanted this to stop. "Anna, dear sweet Anna, I know it's a difficult choice, but it must be made. Please, if you will, direct the night watchmen to their chore." The original videos came back up, and I knew that meant it was time for me to pick someone to die. Maybe it is just a horrible joke that some hacker and his friends like to play on unsuspecting deep web surfers. I stated out loud. It was more to make me feel better than anything. Even though my heart was still pounding, I looked at the people again. There was a family there, children. I couldn't choose them. Then there was the expecting couple. I couldn't do this. It was too much. "Choose," the normally calm voice barked at me. "Choose now." I jumped and looked at the last one. It was the lonely woman with a dog for a companion. She had the least to lose. She was alone without kids or a husband. It wasn't okay, but I quickly clicked her video. "Very well, so shall it be." The voice was calm and smooth once again. The videos of the night watchman came back up. "Night watchman, a choice has been made. You may attend to your work." I watched in horror as 2 of the watchmen began walking toward the houses in front of them, and the 3rd one walked away from a house. I was confused. I chose the lonely woman, but her watchman was walking away. He disappeared into the night, and the feed cut off. The other 2 videos grew bigger and took up the screen. "What's going on? What's going on?" was all I could say. The 2 watchmen that it showed each effortlessly broke into the houses. I was biting my bottom lip so hard it bled. The feeds walked along with them as they each silently roamed through the houses. One watchman walked into the set-up baby room and looked around gingerly, then made his way across the hall to the other bedroom. The other watchman walked slowly down the hall, seemingly trying to decide which room to enter. He chose the children's room. I looked over to the first one. He stood at the foot of the sleeping couple's bed, holding a huge machete. He walked to one side and began swinging wildly. There were screams so loud and frightened that I felt like I might pass out or throw up. I looked over to the other video, reluctantly. The watchman stood in the children's room, right in the center of the pink bunk bed. He also brandished a machete. I screamed as he raised it up and reached over and pulled the computer plug out of the wall. I was terrified, traumatized. What had I just witnessed? What had I just done? My mouth felt dry. My head was spinning out of control. My heart felt like it might burst from my chest. After several hours, I decided to check my computer and hope that the nightmare I had witnessed was gone. There was nothing. Days later, I was checking my email when I stopped and recoiled in horror. There was an email from the night watchman. I finally opened it. I really don't know why. Maybe I was hoping they would tell me I had been punked or something. Instead, it was just a few large words on an otherwise white background. "Jenna thanks you for excluding her from a night watchman fate. We thank you for your choices too. We truly enjoyed our encounter with you. Come play again anytime." Attached was a picture of the lonely woman walking her dog in the park, still looking down at her phone. I will never, ever access the deep web again. My bad neighbor. For most of my childhood, my family and I lived one house away from a pedophile. For the sake of this story, I'll call him Mr. Stan. Our old neighborhood started at the top of a hill and went down to a small lake, where the road turned right and branched off into a cul-de-sac and another residential road. Mr. Stan's house was at the top of the hill, and ours was in the middle. Mr. Stan lived in the neighborhood long before we moved in. It's hard for me to remember any vivid details about him, as I was very young at the time. But what I do remember is that every time he saw us, his face would scrunch up as if he smelled something terrible. There was one house between his place and ours, something I am very grateful for. I don't know what life would have been like if we had to live right next to him. Right from when we were little, my parents were very strict about walking past Mr. Stan's house. They told us that Mr. Stan was sick in the head, and if he ever asked us to come into his house, we were never, ever allowed to do so by ourselves. For years, no one told us exactly why Mr. Stan was bad, but we didn't need details. We just knew to avoid him. The look he gave us whenever he was working on his car or planting flowers in his garden was enough. When my sister and I would walk up the hill to school, we would cross the street when we got to his place, just to be safe. Like I said, I don't remember very much about Mr. Stan, and his twisted story begins long before I was even born. For this, I turned to my mom to fill in the details. Mom said that before we'd ever moved into the cul-de-sac, around the late 70s, early 80s, Mr. Stan already had the reputation of being a heavy drinker. He would get drunk and go over to the house of the family right across the street from us to do terrible things to the daughter while she was babysitting. The daughter tried to tell her mother about it, but since she was a rebellious child, her mother didn't believe her. Her family and Mr. Stan's family were actually good friends. Mr. Stan worked as a corrections officer, and soon accusations surfaced that Mr. Stan and another officer regularly molested their co-workers' kids. Mr. Stan was able to avoid conviction by ratting out the other officer, but in the process, he lost his job. As far as I know, he never really worked after that. Mr. Stan had 2 daughters of his own, and while the older one claimed she was molested and suffered from mental problems as a result, the younger one said she was never mistreated in any way and grew up to be a very positive person. Mr. Stan's wife stood by her husband and claimed he was innocent throughout the whole ordeal. Ironically, the older daughter's emotional instability resulted in her children going to live with Grandpa. More on that in a moment. When my family moved into our house in the cul-de-sac, our next-door neighbor, a kind but nosy old man, told my dad to keep my sister and I away from Mr. Stan. He told my parents the gossip and Mr. Stan's history with children, which understandably horrified them both. As a result, my mom and dad were wary of him from the start. Mr. Stan was cordial enough, he would wave hello to my family and all that neighborly stuff. According to Mom, he even offered to babysit my little sister and I, to which my parents politely but emphatically declined. Then sometime around 2002, my dad was going to work when he came across a neighborhood kid. Let's call her Lana, on her way up the street. My dad is a chatty person, and so he asked Lana what she was up to. Lana told him that she was going to Mr. Stan's house to give him a back rub. Dad knew that something was off, and so he told Lana's parents. To his surprise, they weren't alarmed at all and said that sort of thing happened all the time. According to Mom, when Lana was older, Dad asked her if Mr. Stan ever acted inappropriately toward her during those visits, and her answer was definitely. When my sister was in kindergarten and I was in grade 3, Mr. Stan's grandkids came to live with him, and his wife for reasons I mentioned earlier. My parents couldn't believe this was allowed by anyone, especially considering the allegations and neighborhood gossip around Mr. Stan. His granddaughter was in the same kindergarten class as my sister, and his grandson was about my age. Mom told me that it was so disturbing to see the sweet little granddaughter at school every day and know what was probably going on behind closed doors. My parents have always had strong morals, particularly my dad. They would often talk about what they should do. They wanted to report Mr. Stan to the authorities before any harm could come to his grandchildren. Mom and Dad knew that if they reported Mr. Stan, they would be putting themselves at risk, and the rest of the neighborhood was no help. Mom said it was as if they were all hiding under rocks and turning a blind eye to what was happening. In the end, my parents' strong morality won out, and they decided, with the risk of being exposed as whistleblowers, to report Mr. Stan to the principal at my elementary school. The principal, in turn, called the ministry who sent people to Mr. Stan's house for home visits and investigations. In the end, it was decided that the grandchildren would be removed from Mr. Stan's house. Mom isn't sure how it happened, but somehow it was leaked that my parents were the ones who reported Mr. Stan as a child molester. She thinks Lana's family may have had a hand in it. And, as Mom put it, that's when the real fun began. Mr. Stan was no longer friendly toward my family. No more waves, no more chit-chat. Instead, he would target my mom with his car if she was walking down the road alone, or scream obscenities at my dad as he went to work. A few times he crossed the center line to scare us if we passed each other while driving. He told my dad that he ruined his life and that he was a horrible person. Thinking about that now really boils my blood because my dad is one of the kindest and most considerate men I know. Mom was miserable and wanted to move, but Dad, as unshakable as he is, said he wasn't in a hurry. Mom told me it took 3 years of house hunting before she finally convinced Dad it was time to go. Only after all of this, when we had been living in our beautiful new home out in the country, did I finally start to uncover the details to this story. But sadly, it doesn't end there. After we moved out of the cul-de-sac, Lana and other girls who were now grown up came forward to report Mr. Stan and what he had done. He was hauled into court for a second time, and this time there was no one he could rat on to save himself. The testimony against him was building up. My parents followed the trial in the newspaper. They wanted to see him put away for all the terrible things he'd done. I have no memory of these proceedings, of course, and nobody wanted to explain it to me. I don't blame them. Mr. Stan was not only a former corrections officer, but now he was also a convicted pedophile. He knew he would not last long if he went to prison. So, on a quiet morning 1 week before his sentencing, Mr. Stan took a hunting rifle and shot himself. The folks who moved into Lana's house after her family left were walking their kids to school when they heard the shot. Mom tells me the image of that scene haunts her to this day. I think she imagines what it would have been like if it were her walking my sister and I to school in place of that other family. Or maybe she was disturbed to learn that Mr. Stan had a gun. I know it sounds harsh, but I'm glad he's gone. He can never hurt another child again. My memories of this whole ordeal are far less interesting than the actual event. But one thing I do remember very clearly is being afraid of Mr. Stan's house. I knew it was dangerous. In my memory, it was painted black with white stucco. The car park and stairs to the front door were all underneath the wood roof, which cast the entire front of the house into shadow. To me, it was a monster house, though I didn't know why. My sister and I only ever went to Mr. Stan's front door once. It was Halloween, and my parents decided it was okay for us to trick or treat at his house. Since they would be standing at the bottom of the stairs, I was actually very reluctant to go, and my parents had to encourage me that it was okay. Mr. Stan's house was the only one that didn't need Halloween decorations to be scary. So my sister and I cautiously climbed the stairs and rang the doorbell. Mr. Stan's wife opened the door. She was kind to us and gave us candy. And I remember being surprised that Mr. Stan's wife was so nice. But what I remember most was that I wanted to see inside the forbidden house. For some reason, this has still stuck with me. I looked behind Mrs. Stan, and there was Mr. Stan in a wife-beater top, beer belly and all, sitting in an armchair watching TV. It was dim in the living room, except for a lamp and the glow of the TV. Mr. Stan didn't look at us. For years, I wondered if that was what bad men looked like. When I think about this story now, 11 years later, it really hits me how dark my neighborhood was under the surface. It's quite disturbing to me, because my childhood was actually quite happy. I was too young to notice anything wrong. I couldn't sense the tension that my parents lived with every day. I didn't know how much potential danger my sister and I were in. All I knew was that it was a beautiful day to play with my marbles and go to the lake. But now that I think of it, Mr. Stan may have been the reason that my parents bought a copy of You Can Say No, a picture book that teaches children about safety around bad people. I think my parents handled the situation very well, and I am so thankful they were attentive and brave during the whole thing. This story could have gone very differently. When I think about our old house on the cul-de-sac, it's usually the happy memories I think of first. Mom tells me that despite all the trouble they went through, neither she or Dad regret the decisions they made, and she left me with one last ominous message. They say that every neighborhood has a pedophile living there. Most of the time, we just don't know it. Diary of a Downward Spiral. Personal Diary of Felicity Beaumont. March 21st. Dear Diary, oh God, I haven't done something like this since I was a little girl. It just sounds so silly coming from me now. It's amazing how life can change in the blink of an eye. A couple of months back, I was in peak physical condition, training to run a marathon. Now I'd be lucky to hobble to the bathroom. How did this all happen? That's a good question. I can hardly remember myself. The last thing I remember is visiting a friend's house for a Christmas party, and then waking up in the IQ barely being able to move. To my understanding, black ice was the culprit. I guess it was the airbag that saved my life, or what was left of it. So, here I am now. The doctors recommended that I start writing things down. They say it will help me better keep my emotions in check, and maybe even jog my memory. Jog my memory. Maybe I should choose my words a little more carefully. Everyone always tells me how lucky I am to be alive. But you know what? That's bullshit. I'm supposed to tell the truth here, if only here. Anyone who thinks we're lucky just for existing is too stupid to understand that there are in fact worse things than dying. I haven't slept well for fucking months now. The funny thing about tossing and turning is that you don't start to appreciate it until you can't do it anymore. And I keep hearing voices coming from upstairs. When I finally do get to sleep, I am haunted by hellish nightmares of the accident. It's the same horrifying images played on loop each time. My body being meshed and compressed along with the cold, hard steel from the car. My body, and it forming some kind of demented sandwich. Every morning, I wake up and spend a good minute or so trying to force myself out of bed, eager to pour myself a cup of coffee and take on the day. The sight of my bed sores and the agonizing pain that comes with them snap me back to reality really quick. Okay, enough negativity for today. I have to remember what the psychologist said. Try your best to focus on the positive. I hate to break it to you, Doc, but once you've been ton off the road going 70 miles an hour, the rose-tinted spectacles you've been wearing your entire life tend to turn to shit. Here I am now, laying in a hospital bed set up in my family room. I can't even go upstairs in my own bed. And with the string of burglaries that's been going on lately, anyone could get in here in the middle of the night and I'd be completely helpless. My husband, Jack, said he'll take care of it though and make sure nothing happens to me. At the very least, I guess I do in fact have him to be thankful for. I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for him, I don't know what I would have done. The poor thing was in the passenger seat that night. He had too much to drink that night and was riding shotgun. I've seen pictures of what's left of the car, and believe me when I tell you that that side took the brunt on it. The luck on my hubby though, other than some bumps and bruises, he'll be back to his old self in no time. Even though he wasn't driving, I think he still feels a little guilty for what happened. He has to work a lot, but he made sure to get me the most expensive caretaker he could find to watch over me when he cannot be there. She seems great, I'll give her that. But for the money, I would think she would have a slightly better attendance record. What was her name again? Alexa something or other. My mind is drawing a blank right now, although the doctors won't admit it. I think this medicine is fucking with my head. It always has. But what can I do? I gotta take it. Asthma in a bedridden patient is a big no-no. The last thing I need is to catch pneumonia. Thank goodness for Jack and Alexa. They make sure that I never miss a dose. Well, I think that's enough for now. I'm kinda tired. Hopefully I won't need this hospital bed much longer. I miss going upstairs and sleeping next to Jack. It's too bad this damn hospital bed was only built for one. March 28th. Dear Diary. No, you know what? Dear God, I wish I was dead. Why couldn't he just kill me and be done with it? There's a lot of things I can put up with, but there is a limit to this nightmarish hell that I am willing to endure. Did I ever tell you that I can't even wipe my own ass anymore? Nurse or no nurse, I don't care if you have a whole squad of caretakers on standby. Words cannot even begin to describe how much that hurts your pride. But wait, there's more. I had myself a little accident today. Alexa sat me up on the toilet today to do my business. Everything was going okay until the telephone started to ring. I don't know what possessed her to do this, but she left me in there alone while she ran to go get it. I wound up falling at a weird angle and banging my face against the sink. Now I look like I went 15 rounds with Mike Tyson. The three of us had a talk about it when Jack got home from work. It turns out she was under orders from him to make sure the phone got answered. I guess he was expecting an important phone call. I'm glad to know Jack's job takes precedent over me. It's nice to know where I stand. Where I stand. Look at me, there I go again. I talked to him about it after she left. He apologized profusely and promised that from now on, Alexa is to under no circumstances talk on the phone while I am in her care. That was all I got, and I'm sorry, and an assurance that it wouldn't happen again. My head was killing me, and he didn't even offer to massage my neck or anything. He told me he would have his Amazon Echo to remind him to pick up some cream for my eye. I don't think Jack realizes that I can still remember where he keeps his gun. He's lucky I cannot get up out of this bed for myself. This room could use some redecorating, and I think my brains would be the perfect shade of red. I'm no gun expert, but I did in fact take a photography class in high school. The general idea is basically the same. You just point and shoot. April 20th. Dear Dia, you know what? Forget it. That's too childish. Down to business. I'm sorry it has been so long since I've last written. I promised the doctor I'd try to maintain a more consistent schedule. It has all been for good reason, though I assure you. I'm sorry about my last post. I was in a very dark place. But I've had some good long sessions with my psychologist, and after a swift medication change, I think I will be okay. Plus, where my future once seemed bleak and uncertain, I now have a glimmer of hope. I've been working extra hard, both at physical therapy and back at home here with Alexa. I'm proud to report that some of my movement has started to come back. I am now able to hoist myself up in bed and sit up for a little bit. The doctors were very pleased with me. They say if I keep this up, I might even be able to walk again. Granted, it would most likely be with a cane, and I wouldn't be running a marathon anything soon. But it would be so nice to be able to walk upstairs again, to get to sleep in my own bed again. Unfortunately, that's where the good news stops. I wish Jack would have been more excited. He barely said 2 words on the ride home. He was too preoccupied with his damn phone. It must have taken us 20 extra minutes to get home. We hit every goddamn red light on the way. If he wasn't checking a text, he was yelling into that stupid thing. Siri, do this. Siri, remind me about that. Talk to me, you son of a bitch. I might have banged my head a little in the accident, but I'm not an idiot. I am your wife. Let me help you. Take your eyes off the phone and talk to me. At least tell me who you're texting. That'd be something to talk about. But no, he's been so secretive lately, and I can't stand it. Ever since the accident, he's been this way. He says he loves me, but his heart just isn't in it. At first, I was grateful he got Alexa to help me out. But now I'm starting to think it was just more convenient for him to pay someone rather than deal with me himself. I don't know. I guess I'm done for now. I'm exhausted. Those damn voices won't let up. April 27th. I haven't been sleeping well lately. Remember about the voices I was hearing? I feel like they're getting louder. I didn't get to sleep until around 5 in this time. Jack keeps saying he doesn't hear anything. I don't know, he can't. I swear they must be coming right from our room. He keeps telling me that I'm just dreaming it, but I can tell the difference between dreams and reality. I am only having one dream, and it's still the nightmare of the accident. These voices are all too real. One of these days, I'll be strong enough to get out of this bed, and I'm going to confront them. I know that I am not crazy. Alexa didn't show up today. According to Jack, she wasn't feeling well, so it was just the 2 of us today. I must admit, today he did seem to be a bit more attentive than normal. We actually had a halfway pleasant day. Even though I was pretty tired, he actually managed to take my mind off it. He picked just like he did when he carried me through the door when we first bought the house, and he placed me into the passenger seat of his convertible. We had a pleasant drive in the country, and for dinner, he took me where we had our first date. He apologized for being so tied up with work lately and presented me with a bottle perfume, both as a gift for doing so well with my therapy and an apology. The bottle was partially empty, but I didn't care. This stuff isn't easy to find anymore. He said he got it at a garage sale. He knows how much I love the old-fashioned stuff. At least he was thinking of me. I was so excited I could hardly contain myself. I think that's enough for now. It's nice not being able to sleep from excitement. I never thought I would feel this way again. April 28th. God damn it. Son of a bitch. I can't believe it. Does he think I'm some kind of an idiot or something? I refuse to put up with this. Alexa came back to work today. She smelled awfully familiar. I cannot believe that I didn't notice this before. That bitch was wearing perfume. The same kind that Jack claimed he found for me. I'll be he looked really hard, all right. I can't believe I didn't see it before. Alexa's absences, Jack's clandestine phone calls, him being constantly preoccupied. And those voices, I wasn't imagining them at all. And that bastard tribe had me thinking maybe I really was imagining it. I am not going to stand for this, literally. If I wasn't determined to walk again before, I am for sure now. I'm not going to let him make a fool out of me. He will pay for this. May 26th. I think this will be my last entry for a while. I'm sorry I've been gone for so long again. I had to take some time to myself. It's all been worth it though. Unfortunately for my husband, my dreams have been coming in nice and clear lately. I remember everything now. That night of the accident, My husband was in the passenger seat after he put himself there. One of us drank too much that night, and it was him. I was never the designated driver. I've been training harder than I ever thought possible, both at therapy and here at home. I decided to put my sleepless nights to good use and get in some extra exercise. No one knows this, not Alexa, not my husband, nobody. I can walk again. I've had to hide it from everyone. I'm not in tip-top shape yet, and my balance is very shaky, and I'm not the fastest. But I think I can do the stairs. I can hear then two of them talking up there right now. I think I'll drop in and pay them a little visit. Oh boy, are they going to be surprised. I found where Jack moved his gun. I guess he isn't as good at hiding things as he is. It's time to end this. I hope he burns in hell for what he did to me. To whoever reads this first, my doctor, the authorities, I'm sorry, but this was the only way. The following day. This is a Channel 7 News special bulletin. We begin tonight with a tragic story of a domestic abuse situation turned deadly. 32-year-old Felicity Beaumont was found dead late yesterday afternoon after her caretaker arrived late for a shift to find her laying motionless at the bottom of the stairs, clutching a 9mm pistol in her hand. Her husband, 34-year-old Jack Beaumont, was found clinging to life in the couple's bedroom after suffering a severe gunshot wound to the chest. When he was discovered, he could still be heard muttering into his Amazon Echo saying, "Alexa, dial 911. Authorities believe Miss Beaumont to have been brandishing the firearm when she slipped down the stairs, causing her to break her neck. My psycho neighbor. I was only 2 years old at the time of the following event, so my neighborhood is a weird shape. It goes off a main road into what would be a cul-de-sac, but at the circle end, splits off into another cul-de-sac. Halfway down this road, it splits off into another road and ends. I will not be disclosing which road I live on, and I don't know which house the neighbor in question lived in. There is an empty abandoned house in the immediate area, however. So the story goes that the husband of 2 children, along with his wife and mother-in-law, lived in the neighborhood. For unknown reasons, the husband stabbed his mother-in-law in the neck and killed her. He then proceeded to attack his family. The wife was injured, but managed to flee with the children to our house. My parents let them in, and my dad grabbed his police gun, and my mother called the police on duty. The husband never chased them, however, and was arrested and successfully charged with the murder. I don't know what happened to any members of the family after that. So, Mr. Pisco neighbor, let's never meet again.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.